welcome to our family's true tales of the supernatural. This is our Halloween special. For this episode, I'll be talking about a few different things. I'll give a few updates on eerie things I've seen recently in the house where I live. I'll also talk about a few apparitions I've seen through the years. I'll also talk about a few things some other family members experienced through the years. Here's some updates. I recently saw a few shadow figures in the house where I live. I usually see them near our side door at our dining room. I recently grounded myself when I stepped outside with no shoes on as I talked to a friend of mine. That grounding has slowed down some of the activity in our house. I've also watched a few of the doors in our house open and close by themselves recently. One was the incident with the side door at our dining room. The other was the door to our addition in the back of the kitchen. I could mark it up as just being the wind, yet it was interesting that the door opened for about 2 or 3 seconds and then closed back again all by itself. Those incidents might have been due to the wind, but I'm not so sure. Anyways, I wouldn't argue over it since I have no evidence to prove it one way or the other, so I'll move on. Now, another situation was at the house that we've been renovating over the last few years. My coworker Ed and I were working over at the house one day recently. He was at the front of the living room examining some electrical wall outlets, and he turned to talk to someone he saw at the back of the room, thinking it was me. I then walked into the front of the living room from the hallway, and he got a bit startled seeing me there. He told me that he just saw someone that seemed like me at the back of the room. He said he thought he was talking to me until I walked in the front of the room. I turned to look over at the back of the room, and I didn't see anyone there. I then went outside to make sure someone hadn't passed the window, and I didn't see anyone out there either. This house has a lot of activity that I witnessed through the years, so seeing apparitions and shadow figures wasn't surprising. Now, on to some other stories about apparitions I've seen in the house where I live. Well, I've seen full-body apparitions in the house where I live on a few occasions. The first time I saw an apparition in our house was when I had a kidney stone and had just gotten out of the hospital. Through the next few days, I saw an apparition of a man standing outside my partially open bedroom door. I was incapacitated and I was taking some strong medicine. I kept seeing the apparition out of the corner of my eye as I watched TV. At first, I thought it was a hallucination due to the powerful pain reliever medication the doctor gave me. Yet I stopped using the medication after a few days, but I kept seeing the apparition for a few more months. The apparition looked like a guy who was pale and had blood running down over his face from his forehead. The guy also had long hair, and he looked like a young adult man. It turned out that the family that previously lived there had an adult son who died in a motorcycle wreck. I think that was who I was seeing. I eventually asked the apparition if he would like for me to pray that God would open a doorway for him to go to heaven. It looked like he nodded his head as if to say yes. So I prayed for the guy, and he stopped showing up for a few years. A few years later, I thought I saw an apparition that looked similar to him. Yet this apparition was in good condition and didn't have blood trickling down his face. It seemed like he came to check on me and to let me know he was okay and that he was thanking me for helping him move on. Sometime later, on a night when a hurricane knocked out our power, I saw another apparition in our dark hallway. I was going to get ready to go to bed for the night and wanted to brush my teeth and use the toilet. As I stepped out of my bedroom into the hallway to walk to the bathroom, I saw something at the other end of the hallway. I stopped in my tracks because it looked like a person standing there. I was sure my parents went to bed, so I was wondering who this other person was. I wondered if it was an intruder and if I would need to defend myself. I stood there getting a good look at the person, but since it was so dark, I had a difficult time seeing them clearly. As I strained my eyes to see them, it looked like a man standing at the other end of the hallway, yet the man looked very pale and wore light gray or white clothing. It looked like he was wearing pants and either a light-toned shirt or suit jacket. I couldn't quite tell since it was so dark. Since I was having difficulty seeing in the dark, I pulled out my small cell phone to light up the hallway. As I held the cell phone up in the air, the man seemed to disappear and turn into a pillar of steam or smoke. Since I couldn't clearly see anyone standing there, I moved my hand and arm back down to my side. I went to put my cell phone back in my pocket, but I noticed that the pale-looking man had reappeared. I was startled to see him again, so I made a quick move to raise my phone back up in front of me. Immediately, the man disappeared again, and I only saw what looked like a pillar of steam again. I strained my eyes again to make sure whether anyone was there or not. I didn't see anyone, so I put my hand back down at my sides again. The pale man reappeared once again. I felt so scared that I was afraid to approach the man to see if I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. I pulled my phone up again and saw the pillar of steam again. Yet this time I moved my hand back and forth to shine the light from a few different directions. I also wanted to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. As I moved my hands side to side and up and down, all I saw was the steam. I also noticed that I didn't hear anyone step aside or jump out of the way, so there couldn't have been anyone there playing a prank or stepping aside into the dining room. As I lowered my hand again, the pale figure silently reappeared. I suspected that this was a full-body apparition that I was seeing. I don't know if this might have been the other apparition that looked like it had blood trickling down its face. I couldn't see clear enough to tell one way or the other. Since I had to use the toilet really bad, I moved very slow as I stepped into the bathroom, and I closed the door behind me. I proceeded to brush my teeth and use the toilet, and then opened the door very slow so I could take a peek. I didn't see anyone there, so I moved very slow as I stepped out into the hallway. I held my phone down toward the floor so I could see where I was walking. I could see out of the left corner of my eyes that it seemed like the pale apparition was still standing there in the same place. I didn't feel comfortable enough to try to get another good look at it, so I walked to my bedroom. I then closed the door, went to bed, and went to sleep for the night. I was so scared, I didn't even want to deal with the situation at all, so I just went to sleep. I got up the next morning and didn't notice any problems at all. Sometime later, after a long day's work, I went to bed for the night, but was later awakened by a pain in my stomach. I needed to use the toilet so bad that I was getting a stomach ache. I got up and walked into the hallway to go to the bathroom. As I got to the bathroom, I noticed the dim nightlight was on, and I could see what looked like a man standing in front of the sink. The man was wearing tan pants and a light-toned shirt with tiny green stripes going up and down and side to side. I could see clear enough to notice it was not my dad, but I could also tell that I didn't recognize who it was. I hoped it wasn't an intruder. I thought that maybe my parents had a guest staying for the night and forgot to tell me. I spoke to the guy and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize we had guests." Then I asked, "Could I use the toilet? I need to go so bad my stomach hurts." The guy stood still and didn't move at all, so I tried to tap on his shoulder to ask him if I could use the toilet. Yet as I tried to tap on his shoulder, my hands seemed to move in the air without touching anything. I tried to reach further over to tap on his shoulder or arm, but again my hand didn't seem to touch anything. I tried to reach even further, and yet I still didn't seem to touch anything. I tried to look at my hand to make sure if I was reaching far enough or not. It seemed like I should have touched something, but my hand wasn't touching anything. I then reached my left hand over to turn on the light switch, and as I did, I kept an eye on the guy. I wanted to make sure he didn't try to get away or attack me. Yet as I turned the switch on, the man instantly disappeared right in front of my eyes. I was a bit startled and looked around to make sure he hadn't run away. I didn't see him run through the hallway, and I didn't see him behind the bathroom door or in the shower. I started to realize that I had come face to face with a ghostly apparition. Then at that moment, I started to realize that I was having a lot of pain in my stomach and needed to use the toilet. So I closed the door and used the toilet. I then washed my hands and I moved very slow as I opened the door. I peeked through the small opening in the doorway, but didn't see anyone. I then made a slow and careful move back into the hallway and walked back to my bedroom to go to sleep for the night. Sometime later, when I was home one night, I went to our dining room to get a late night snack. As I sat down at our dining room table with a cup of cold water and a snack, I started nibbling on my snack. I then heard the back door to our addition open, and I turned my head to see who was coming into the kitchen. The person looked similar to my dad, with light-colored hair, a maroon jacket, and dark-colored pants. I saw the person turn and go into our laundry room. I thought my dad was looking for some tools or some screws to put something together. I kept my head turned to look at the laundry room to make sure he found what he was looking for. I thought that if he couldn't find what he was looking for, I would go help him find whatever it was he wanted. No one exited the laundry room after about 20 seconds, so I got up to check to see if I could help him. As I got to the laundry room, I saw that there was no one in the laundry room at all. I was startled and dumbfounded because there is no other way out of the laundry room except that one doorway. There are no other doors, windows, attic entrances, or hatches to go under the house. So there was no other way a person could get out of that room. I had kept my head turned toward the laundry room and never looked away from it. So no human could have gotten out of that room without me seeing them. At least not a mere mortal human. Yet as I looked, there was no one there. I was a bit stunned to see another apparition like this. My mom came into the room right after that, but I didn't tell her what I just saw. I didn't want to scare her. She had seen some of the paranormal activity in our house in the past, yet she told me not to talk to her about it since it was too creepy and it scared her too much. I sat back down in the dining room after that and thought about what I had seen. I couldn't figure it out, and I knew it wasn't a normal human being because they disappeared into thin air. I knew it had to be paranormal activity. So now I'd like to tell you about the paranormal activity that my mom had witnessed that scared her really bad. A few months after I saw the apparition of the man with blood on his face, my mom saw something one night. My parents and I had gone to our respective bedrooms to sleep for the night. Yet later that night, something happened that left us with eerie feelings and frazzled nerves. A short time after my mom went to sleep, my dad couldn't sleep, so he got up to play a card game on their computer. As my mom was sleeping, she had a dream that there was a shadowy demonic figure in her bedroom. The figure seemed to be wearing a black cloak and had long, sharp claws on its fingers. As she had this dream, she saw the shadowy figure walk over to her and was leaning over toward her. This creature appeared to be short and chubby and held out its arms and pointed claws toward my mom. The dream was so disturbing that she woke up, but she could still see the demonic figure after she woke up. The figure was still standing near the bed. She was so frightened that she screamed and threw a pillow at the shadowy figure to try to fight it off. My dad heard my mom's loud scream, and he got up from the computer chair and ran to check on her. He ran down the hallway and into their bedroom, turned the light on, and asked what was wrong. My mom was shouting about the shadowy demonic figure she saw as she cowered at the head of the bed. She leaned away from the dark creature and towards the head of the bed. She was almost inconsolable as my dad arrived, yet my dad couldn't see the dark figure at all. He went over to my mom and wrapped his arms around her and held on to her for a while. My mom was shaking and trembling from being so frightened. As she sat there shivering and weeping, my dad asked her what was wrong. At first, all she could do was point over to the end of the bed where she saw the evil-looking figure. My dad looked around, but saw nothing. A few seconds later, the dark figure seemed to fade from my mom's sight over a few seconds' time, and finally it disappeared. Since my dad didn't see the shadowy figure, he stayed there hugging my mom and holding her in his arms. My mom was so distraught that all she could do was clutch onto my dad, sit there, and cry. She was then trying to explain to him what she saw. The next morning I got up to see my mom sitting at the dining room table, and she asked if I heard the commotion. I told her I didn't hear anything and that I slept through the whole night for the most part. She then told me everything that had happened that night and about the demonic-looking creature she saw. She told me how she saw the figure near her bed and that she even saw it while she was awake with the lights on. She then mentioned that she had screamed when she was awake, and she wondered if her scream had woke me up. I sheepishly admitted that I didn't hear her scream at all. I had woke up for a few seconds and thought I heard them walk down the hallway to get a late-night snack. She said that was after the whole thing was over. She said they went to the dining room to eat a snack and calm down for a while. I felt a bit awkward that I didn't wake up to help, but I did try to comfort her when we spoke in the morning. I told her that she wasn't the only one who had seen paranormal activity in our house. I told her about the man I saw with blood streaming down his face. I also told her how my coworkers and I had seen some strange stuff in a couple of the houses that we renovated. She seemed to calm down a bit when she realized that she wasn't the only one who saw these strange things. A few months later, my siblings met at our house for a Thanksgiving meal, and the conversation turned to paranormal things. I told them that the ruckus that happened a few months prior to this was when my mom saw that dark demonic figure. I also told them about the man I saw that had blood streaming down his face. My sister also reminded me of the time when we were at her house and a ghostly woman's voice called to us sometimes. My dad said that he didn't believe in that stuff, yet my sister reminded him that one of the times he was at her house, he was awakened by the ghostly woman's voice. She also mentioned that her father-in-law had also been awakened by the ghostly woman's voice. She also mentioned that I had been awakened by the ghostly woman's voice, and after she mentioned it, I remembered it quite clearly. One of my younger brothers was sitting there listening to us, and at first, his face showed no emotion. I thought he too was going to say he didn't believe in this type of stuff either, but then he told us about his experience. He told us about the time he heard a legend about a local graveyard, but he and his friends didn't believe it at first. So they all wanted to go to that graveyard and check it out. The legend was that if you stood in the middle of the graveyard at the flagpole at midnight, something would happen. They didn't know what was supposed to happen, but only that something paranormal would happen. So my brother and his friends went to that graveyard shortly before midnight, and they walked to the flagpole. They stood there in the center of the graveyard for a short time until it was exactly midnight. At first, they didn't notice anything happen. They felt a bit disappointed and as if the legend had been disproved. They were about to walk back to their cars when they started to hear something. It sounded like a horse was slowly trotting across the graveyard toward them. It was a clear night with bright moonlight that made it light enough so they could see all around them. They looked back and forth across the graveyard, but they still didn't see anything. The sound of the horse trotting kept getting closer to them, and they all started to get a very eerie feeling. My brother said that at this point, he and his friends all looked at each other in wide-eyed fear, and they all ran. They all ran back to their cars as fast as they could, and they drove away. It turned out that there were several Civil War soldiers that were buried in that graveyard. Perhaps they were still riding their horses patrolling the grounds. According to my brother, that sure is what it sounded like. It sounded like horses that were prepared for battle. As my brother was ending his part of the conversation, he assured us that he didn't want to do any more paranormal investigations. It seemed like his experience was so scary that he didn't want to get involved in anything like that again. He also didn't want anything following him home. I then continued the conversations by telling my family about the paranormal activity I saw in houses we renovated. I started to tell them about the paranormal activity I had seen in the house I renovated years before that time. I told them about the house where a roll of carpet had rolled almost all the way across a room all by itself. I later put a carpenter's level on the floor and found the floor to be reasonably level, so it wasn't sloped downhill, and that couldn't have made the carpet roll across the room like that. I also told them how my dad and I talked to a guy on one side of the house, and a vacuum came on all by itself. The vacuum was on the other side of the house, and there wasn't anyone on that side of the house at all. A short time later, I spoke to the owner, and here's what they said. They told me that they had seen the back door open by itself many times, and then close again. The door would even lock itself, and when it was locked, you couldn't jiggle the doorknob to open the door. So somehow the door was opening and closing by itself, and locking and unlocking the door all by itself. I then told him about another house we renovated where my co-workers and I had seen many strange occurrences. I heard footsteps that led right up to me, and I looked and didn't see anything there. There were also incidences where tools got tossed aside from a bucket that had a small piece of plywood on it. I also saw an apparition out of the corner of my eye in that house. When I stood up to talk to the person, they disappeared right before my eyes. The younger children then walked into the room, and we ended that conversation so we wouldn't scare them. I later told my family that we should gather all our stories like this and put them into a book. I typed up my stories and gathered my family's stories and put them into a small ebook format. I gave them each a copy of the ebook, or at least I gave one to all who wanted one. Some found the subject so eerie that they didn't want a book about it. I later had experiences with another house that I was renovating, and I'm still renovating that house. That house has had a lot of different paranormal occurrences in it. Let me list a few of the things that have happened in that house. First of all, there were times when I saw a pale figure in light pale clothing run across the hallway into the living room area. I'd go look in the living room and wouldn't see anyone there. One day I was going to show my coworker some things to work on, and we saw the same thing. As we stood shoulder to shoulder looking through the hallway toward the front door, we saw the pale figure. The pale figure ran across the hallway into the living room again. Yet you couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Sometime later, I started seeing shadow figures in different places inside the house. One time I saw the shadow figure run up the stairs as I looked into the hallway. The figure seemed to run from the bottom of the steps right up to the top. Sometime later, I thought one of my co-workers was working at the top of the steps, but then I heard him working downstairs. I then looked back at the figure at the top of the stairs, and the shadow figure faded away as I looked at it. I then went to the edge of the stairs and saw my co-worker working on some things at the bottom of the stairs. I knew he couldn't have been in both places at once. I also knew I heard him work at the bottom of the stairs as I saw the shadow figure at the top of the stairs. I later started seeing the shadow figure downstairs on the first floor. I would be working on something in the living room, and I'd see something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like a shadow figure had walked up beside me to see what I was doing. Yet I'd turn my head to look at them, and they would disappear in an instant. That kept happening over and over again. It must have happened at least a half dozen times. There was also times when I heard voices in the house calling out to me when no one else was in the house. One time it sounded like an old guy saying, "Hey, Larry." It was as if he was saying, "Hey there, how's it going?" Yet I never could find anybody in the area where I heard the voice coming from. Another occasion was where I heard what seemed like an elderly lady saying, "Hello? Is anyone there?" I turned and said, "Yeah, I'm here working in the house upstairs on the second floor." I didn't hear any reply, so I looked around to see if anyone was there. I couldn't find anyone there who could have said that. There was no one inside the house. My coworkers said that when I would go to the store to purchase supplies to install in the house, he often heard people calling his name as well. There was also the time when I worked at the house all by myself one day. I kept the main entry doors locked to stay safe so no one could come in and rob me or beat me up. Yet as I worked, I heard footsteps in other places around the house. It sounded like an elderly person with slippers walking through the crumbs of the construction debris, or like they shuffled their feet through sand that was on the floor. I also heard the sound of doors opening and closing, yet I knew the doors were locked and no one else was there. I would walk around the inside of the house to make sure no one was there who would rob me, but I didn't see anyone there. So I'd go back to work and hear more unexplained sounds. I heard the sound of a pencil getting dropped on the floor. I also heard the sound of someone putting a board on a sawhorse to cut it. I looked around to see who was moving the boards around, but I didn't see anyone there. I kept hearing those types of noises all day long, and it was getting to be very difficult to get work done. As I got to quitting time that day, I was glad to leave and go home, because the strange stuff was starting to get to me that day. I recently saw a news story about hauntings. The story showed that 1/4 of all people in the United States say they think they have lived in a haunted house. Do you think you are one of those folks? Well, I'll leave that for you to think about. As for now, I hope to see you in the next episode of Our Family's True Tales of the Supernatural. Good night, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite, and don't let the ghosts give you a fright. Goodbye for now.